Welcome to the Counter Narrative Podcast, a show designed to change the way we talk and think about education. By sharing stories of successes and triumphs, we aim to challenge the dominant narrative that often negatively portrays our disenfranchised populations. I'm your host, Charles Williams, an educator for 15 years, a current school principal in Chicago, and an educational consultant. Let's get started. Hey listeners, before we jump into the show, I wanted to tell you about the Equip to Achieve EQ and Remote Learning Summit, which will be held from April 8th through the 11th. Now, this is a can't-miss opportunity for those seeking strategies, information, and inspiration on everything from parenting and teaching in the digital age to addressing social isolation through the lenses of emotional intelligence and social and emotional learning. And the best part? You don't even have to leave your house to attend. We weren't prepared for the impacts of COVID-19 on our educational system, but this virtual event promises to bridge the gaps and equip and empower attendees with the knowledge and skills to do better in 2021 and beyond. Now, here's the best part. Registration for this 4-day event would normally cost you over $200. But if you use the link found in the show notes, you can get full access to this entire conference for only $100. That's over 50% off. So be sure to register today by using the link in the show notes or on any of my other sites. In this episode, I chat with Clement Townsend, a sports journalist who has spent close to 2 decades in front of the camera on local news, cable, and the internet. His career took him to several markets including San Angelo, Texas, Mobile, Alabama, Lynchburg, Virginia, and Chicago, Illinois. Clement has covered numerous big events throughout his career, such as the Super Bowl, NBA All-Star Game, and multiple college football national championships. Clement is the author of How to Become a Broadcasting Star and the founder of Broadcasting Career Mentor, or BCM. BCM provides media training for youth across the country and offers in-person training and virtual media training through the Video Journalism Pro online course. During our conversation, we discussed ways to use media as a platform in which students can blend various academic skills and apply them in a real-world setting. He challenges that such programs should not be considered as extras, but instead should be essential. As we push our students to higher order thinking skills, he urges educators to transform students into not just consumers of information, but also creators. Clement recognizes that teachers may be hesitant to incorporate multimedia into their lessons, citing that some lack the skills while others lack the support necessary to take such risks. Despite this, he insists that educators start small and allow students to flourish. As educators, it is not our job to know everything, but instead we need to facilitate our students' learning, and sometimes that means growing together. Ready? In 3, 2, 1, and action. Hello and welcome to the Counter Narrative Podcast. I'm so happy that listeners, you are back in today. I have a wonderful guest with me, somebody who has been in touch with me. We have been communicating for months. And so I'm so excited that Clement's finally able to make it onto the show. Clement, good morning. And how are you doing today?
Doing very well. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, as soon as, we connected and I saw some of the work that you were doing, I said, I have to get this guy on the show. So, I feel like I'm at an advantage here, right? I know about you, but the listeners are like, wait, Charles, tell us about this man. So, Clement, could you do me a favor and just introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about yourself and what you're up to.
So I am Clement Townsend, a media consultant for youth. I work with different schools across the country. I took a pretty unusual route into education. My parents were both educators, so I have a special place in my heart for the profession. My mother was a teacher, my dad was an administrator, but I wanted to do something different. As a matter of fact, I wanted to be an athlete, but early on, I figured out because of my height that that wasn't going to work out. So I tried to figure out what could I do to keep me around sports. With my parents being educators, they said I needed to have a plan. Going to college was the plan, but how can I stay around sports? So I said, well, maybe I can talk about sports and do media. And so the next step was to figure out, well, what major do you have to have? So I figured out most people in media major in communications, went to Temple University. That prepared me very well to go right into television after I graduated from college. So I was a sports anchor, a sports journalist, spent time in San Angelo, Texas, small market, thought I would be there a couple of years. I was in San Angelo, Texas for 5 years, Charles.
Oh, wow.
Learned a lot about myself, a lot of resiliency, perseverance, but I determined and I made up my mind that I wouldn't quit because I wanted my parents to see me on television at home in Chicago. That was a goal that I set for myself. So after San Angelo, went to Mobile, Alabama. I was there 8 years, got a chance to do some amazing things, covered the Super Bowl, college football national championship, college NCAA NCAA basketball tournament, the big dance, NBA All-Star game, and I came across a lot of youth, a lot of young people that wanted to know how could they do what I was doing, and it always stuck with me. So I was there 8 years, went to Lynchburg, Virginia, and finally, after 14 years total in the business, my dream came true. I got a call to Chicago, Illinois. A network wanted me to come and work for them on television in Chicago, something that I had set, a goal that I set so long ago when I first started. But unfortunately, a couple of months prior to that, my mom got diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. She went through some procedures, thought she would be okay, and I got the job. And the same week, Charles, that I got the job, she passed away. So she wasn't able to see me accomplish that goal and achieve my dream, but my dad did. And after 3 years in Chicago, 17 years in the business, I got laid off. So I was at a crossroads. But what I realized was with what I learned in TV and media, I realized there are some transferable skills there that students need to know. And I know that students are so into video, so into media. So I set out and made a goal to really try to work with schools, use my expertise in the classroom to try to help them learn about media, the power of media, and how they can use that for good and really obtain those transferable skills.
Clement, I think so much of what you said is powerful. First and foremost, this idea of you being a student and wanting to be an athlete. I mean, that is like the quintessential, right? Almost every student we speak to says, yeah, I'm going to be in the NBA. I'm going to be in the NFL. I guess depending on what part of the country you're from, they're going to be in, the soccer league or a hockey league, whatever it may be. There's these aspirations to be an athlete. And, more and more I'm hearing these conversations around the idea that, the sports world is so much larger than just being an athlete, from being, into sports medicine, from being managers to being agents. And even like you said, going into broadcasting and journalism, taking those skills that we gain in school and applying them to that same world. So you're still connected. I think that is a testament to just how much can be done is if we're simply able to broaden our students' experiences and horizons. Out of curiosity, did anybody drive you to that, or is there anybody out there where you're like, man, I really wanted to get into the sports, journalism side of this because I've seen that in other people? Like, I'm just curious how you jumped onto that side of it.
No one really drove me to that in particular. It just so happened for me that was kind of a natural connection. Since I wasn't going to be a professional athlete, along with that, I just took notice of people that were talking to the athletes. And so they were at the games, and I understood that was a career. So they got paid to go to games. So if you can't play the game, in my head, I was just blessed, and my parents were educators. I was just blessed early as a high schooler to connect the dots. What could be better if you can't play it than to be on the court in the locker room and getting paid to attend the sporting events, I just connected the dots. And then certainly watching some people on television in Chicago, my parents, that generation, they were avid news watchers. So to see the sports guy, the sports anchor on the news, I just felt like that would be an area that I would really enjoy, and an area that wouldn't necessarily feel like work. That's what attracted me to that.
All right, all right. And I can absolutely understand. When people ask me about my height, I tell them, I'm 5'8", but I'm 5'9" on a good day if I stretch really well in the morning, right? Like, so I completely,
We're in the same boat.
I understand that height issue. And if for any of my families or students or anybody listening, we joke about my basketball skills because they are absolutely, absolutely non-existent. So, Clement, at the beginning of this, you mentioned that you are now a media consultant for youth. So can we dive into that a little bit more and just explore what are you doing with youth and the media? I know you touched on it, but if we could dive into that just a little more.
So prior to the pandemic, I would go in schools. Sometimes it would be an after school program. Other times it would be during the school day, and really teach youth about media, but using that as a way to develop those common core skills that they need, those reading skills, those writing skills, and those speaking skills. So pre-COVID, I would actually take my equipment, which would consist of a camera, a tripod, a microphone, and even a teleprompter, and teach students what it's like to report. How do you do the research to be knowledgeable? If you're going to do an interview, how do you do the research to ask the questions? Then how do you conduct an interview? And then we will record those sort of things. And then they will watch it back and see how comfortable were they on camera? What were their mannerisms? How did they sound? And even with the teleprompter, how do they develop their reading skills? How do you write something conversationally? So really taking them through the disciplines of being a journalist. And then certainly when COVID happened, well, students don't have the equipment that I have. So I had to kind of shift what I do, but still it was in the same media space. So now there's an online program that I have for teachers that can be complementary to what they do in English. And it just teaches them how to use video to tell stories. Certainly many years ago, probably Charles, when you were in school and I was in school, you pretty much just told stories by writing them down and turning in a paper. But now because of technology, and pretty much all students have a recording device in their pocket, you can tell stories with a cell phone. You can write the story the same way you could do a paper. And now we get into kind of student choice because they can choose the topic. They can do the research. If they have the proper equipment, they can do interviews. But even if they don't, it's all about the critical thinking. How do I look at different pieces of information, gather that information, figure out how I'm going to write this story, and then add visuals to it? Because students, as we know, they like YouTube so much. So many people look at these YouTube stars and want to have a YouTube channel, and they watch Facebook and Instagram. But I'm so passionate, Charles, about students not just being content consumers, but being content creators, and understanding media doesn't have to solely be seen as entertainment. It can be educational.
Oh, absolutely. I love the idea that you're creating another means of access. These are things that we talk about all the time, is making sure that students have access, to their learning and opportunities to showcase, what they have learned, and allowing schools and programs to amplify the voices of students. As you said, when we were in school, the only way to get my voice out in this capacity was to sit down and put pen to paper, right? And we know that some students struggle with that. And because of that, their voices were not always heard. And so, as you mentioned, with technology today, almost everyone has a platform upon which their voices can be heard. And so I love this idea that you're saying, hey, here are these skills that you're learning in class and, in school. This is how we can take those and apply them to a real world setting where your voices can be amplified. And I'm sure. And so I'm curious if you wouldn't mind sharing with us, do you have any stories where you've seen this avenue just really open up students, where students blossomed because now they have a different avenue in which to express themselves?
Certainly, the biggest example and the one that I'm most proud of is a gentleman. He was at a high school, and as we've discussed, he plays sports. And certainly, kids don't have to play sports, that's not a prerequisite. But when I told him my story, he stopped playing sports and really got into media. So much so is that he actually went and created an LLC, created a business. The gentleman's name is Cavell Spearman, and he created a business called Opinion Nation, and he really now wants to have a media company. You know, he's starting a media program at his school to highlight the sports and some of the events going on. He's doing some things on YouTube, doing some things in terms of fashion, and he really understands the power of media. So many students just kind of see media as prank videos and dance challenges and things of that nature. But there's power in media in terms of messaging, Charles, and in terms of information. So when I teach students media, it's about teaching them telling stories that inform, that inspire, and impact. Certainly, I have that journalism background, and a lot of students want to do things for fun, and there's a time and a place for that. But certainly, trying to make a difference through media, or I would say create meaningful media, is what I'm all about. But this young man, Cavell Spearman, I still keep in touch with him, talk with him on a regular basis, and when there are young people, Charles, and you know this, that you give them information and they take it and run with it, and they seem to soak it in. They don't just brush it off, but they apply it. That's so fulfilling, so rewarding, and just encourages me and inspires me to keep going.
I'm definitely going to have to check out. I wanted to call him a kid, but it doesn't sound like he's even a kid. This gentleman Cavell. I'm very curious. I'm always just filled when I hear these stories where students have, like you said, taken an idea and run with it, right? Because that is our goals as educators. It's not to tell students what to do, but to be able to provide them with the tools and the resources, the knowledge and the skills for them to create and to do something great with it. And so definitely want to check that out. And so I have to ask, because I know there's educators out there who are like, yeah, this sounds great. You have a background in media, so this makes sense to you. But what are some obstacles that you've seen where teachers may not really be ready to put, this type of content, or to give students the autonomy to create this type of content? What are some of the obstacles that you've seen in working with students and schools?
I think probably the biggest obstacle is what you mentioned, that teachers don't have experience in this area. So for me, it's a natural connection because I see so many students using media to combine media and education, or to merge those. So the biggest obstacle, I would think, that teachers are hesitant. They don't have the confidence. They don't have the experience in this area. So they don't necessarily want to try it. As an administrator, some teachers might not want to branch out because what if it doesn't work, or what if they don't look confident or experienced in front of their students? And then what if the administrator kind of, maybe, I won't say frowns on them, but I think you know where I'm coming from as a principal. What if this doesn't go the way they thought it would, and then it reflects poorly in the eyes of the administrator? They don't necessarily, maybe their environment is that they don't want to take chances because they want to kind of play it safe, so to speak. So that's kind of the biggest thing. And that's how I try to present the program, and really try to help support teachers that you don't have to be tech savvy. The great thing about it is, certainly for a teacher to try to learn storytelling and pick up some of these programs, whether it's a WeVideo or an Adobe Rush, all a teacher needs to really do, Charles, is to get the students started. And I believe, certainly, and I have a certain level, but I just believe students pick up on technology so fast. So it's nothing wrong with, as a teacher learns, maybe the student can show them a few things and they both learn. But now a student is not necessarily a lecture. It's not necessarily a traditional learning environment. I know when you talk about counter narrative, it's kind of changing the way that learning is delivered, whereas students can really play an active role in what they learn. And if the teacher doesn't know everything, that's okay. But students are able to create, they're able to make content, and it still can be assessed with what they learn. But just getting over that hurdle, Charles, of this might not be something that I'm fully comfortable with, something I'm fully confident in, but still being okay with trying it to understand the impact and the benefit it can have for students.
Clement, what you just mentioned resonates with me because we've been talking about this a lot in various spaces that I'm in where people are afraid to take risks, right? They're afraid, and as you mentioned, I think for teachers on those both of those fronts, what if I mess up and it's going to mess up everything with my students, but also fear of being like penalized, right, by leadership. And so I just want to, first of all, from me to my administrative peers out there, please make sure that you're creating spaces where teachers can take these risks, that they can be innovative, and support them through that. Yes, there's going to be struggles. Yes, there's going to be failures. But just like we say, those things are expected as students are learning and growing. We want the same thing from our teachers. And so we have to give them the space to do that. So then that way, teachers, you take those risks because then you're showing your students it's okay. And Clement, I love the fact that you said this. We are going to learn together. As the teacher, I'm not the one who sits around with all of the information and just simply delivers it to you, but we're going to figure this thing out together. And it is okay for students to get ahead of you. It's going to happen. Be prepared for that, especially in these technological spaces. And so I'm curious.
Charles,
Go ahead, Clement. Go ahead.
do you think a lot of principals, and certainly you can't speak for all principals, but it's okay for students to get ahead of you? That's such a great point. Do you think that's a common environment, or a lot of schools are set up in that fashion?
I think the issue is we so often in traditional educational environments, we look at schools as classrooms as a place where we have to have control, right? Administrators have to be in control of their buildings. Teachers have to be in control of their classrooms. And what we say is that knowledge is power, right? And so if I have more knowledge than you, then I have power over you. And so I can understand where things can get a little bit scary when students start to surpass your level of comfort, your level of knowledge, right? It's one of those things, again, that we talk about. It is critical then for you as an educator not to hinder your students' progress to the limitations of your own capacities, but instead to continuously grow and learn as an educator, to continuously learn and grow in your capacities, so that way your students can stretch too, right? It would be unfair for me to hold my students back because I wasn't ready. And so do I think that those places exist? Absolutely. But I want, these educators, those administrators to hear that. Please do not do that disservice to your students. Learn, grow, step outside of your comfort zone. And it is okay sometimes for leaders to follow. Let your students be leaders, follow them, figure it out, right? Because this is an environment, as we said, we are learning and growing together. So, Clement, I'm glad you asked, because we have to speak truths to this, right? We have to step outside of our comfort zones.
So powerful what you said for teachers not to limit their students to their own capabilities. That's powerful.
So Clement, I wonder if I could get a challenge from you. If you could present a challenge to those who are listening to this, what would be one tip or strategy or something that you would say, hey, you know what? I'm going to challenge you within the next week or so to do this one thing, as we're talking about, giving students choice and amplifying their voices.
I would just say start off with a video, a basic video. If it's English, let them choose a topic and have them present on video. If it's math, create an activity whereby, it certainly depends on the grade level that they can deliver or show that they've mastered or show that they understand the information through video. The same thing with science, just to really incorporate this video piece, because as I mentioned, video is an integral part of our world, our society. It's not going anywhere. I've said recently, I think it will be who knows at what point, but there will come a time when we're watching video on our watch. When you look at, what's taking place now, kind of with the Apple watches, and you can read emails and talk on your watch, you'll be watching video on your watch. So I say all that to say, just incorporate video, really add that piece into the classroom. I think that would be so engaging. I think students would enjoy that. A lot of times in school settings, students are forced to or instructed to put their phone away. And it doesn't have to be on the phone. Certainly, a lot of schools might be remote or hybrid. They can record a video on their laptop, find whatever program they need to record a video just on a computer. So it doesn't have to be on the phone, but just incorporating this video piece to build that engagement, to really try to help students connect to what they're learning and just provide a different way for students to present information. I think you mentioned it. Every student might not necessarily be strong in terms of their writing, but if you can give them another way to present information or demonstrate that they've learned something, that can help a lot of students having that additional option.
Clement, I'm so glad that you mentioned that. Today we had our Black History Month showcase, and we're remote right now. Well, we're hybrid. Students are in the building just 2 days out of the week. And we did almost everything via video. We are accustomed to having this program. Everybody comes out to the school. We put on a big show, but we could not do that this year. And so, my teachers and my students had to step outside of their comfort zones, and they recorded and submitted videos and pictures and audio. And they were so nervous. And I told them, guys, don't freak out. Just do something. Send it to me. And you mentioned WeVideo. That's exactly what I used. And so for listeners out there, WeVideo is super simple, super user-friendly. And we put it all together, and we had a half an hour presentation this morning, which is now, on YouTube. And it was just an incredible opportunity, as we keep talking about, for student voices to be heard in a whole different venue, right? And so I'm glad you mentioned that, right? Start small, do something, because I guarantee this thing is going to grow.
And teachers are so innovative. Like, I truly believe if they sit down and think, and I mentioned it before, whether it's science, whether it's math, whether it's history, this can be used across the different subject areas. It's just really a teacher taking the time, being willing to step outside of their comfort zone, think outside the box a little bit, and maybe leaning on their PLN and seeing, what, how can I add some video into my subject? And I truly believe, I hope that so many teachers would take that challenge, or administrators would take that challenge to their staff that you put forth.
Absolutely. Now, if only we could get standardized assessments to do the same thing. Could you imagine? Just like, hey, I don't have to sit down with paper and a pencil or a Scantron, or I could just talk to you, tell you, and think out loud my answers, and then you could assess my knowledge from there. But I think we got a ways to go before that happens.
I would agree.
So, Clement, as we begin to wrap up here, I am sure that people are out there who are thinking, it sounds like this guy's got a wonderful program, and whether it's just to connect, to learn, and to grow from you, or even to bring you into their own schools and work with their students, what are some ways that people are able to connect with you?
Well, I would love for them to visit the website, www.videojournalismpro.com, www.videojournalismpro.com. I would love for them to check out the online program to really see how they can integrate media right into their classroom and get students creating videos that are meaningful. They can connect with me on LinkedIn. My name, Clement Townsend. Also, Facebook, C Townsend TV. I put a lot of content on Facebook, do a lot of videos talking about media and things of that nature. And just really, Charles, I would love for administrators to kind of see media not necessarily as just an add-on, but see it more of as an essential. Certainly, a lot of schools have art, and they have music, and they have foreign language. But those are kind of, I guess, extra skills. But when I think of media, I really think of math, and I think of science, I think of English, ways that students learn just like the common core skills, the reading skills, because with stories, I teach narration and things of that nature, voicing a story, your writing skills, because you have to write it. And then again, I just mentioned the narration, the speaking skills. So what other area, what other programs, what other subject can students develop their common skills, reading, writing, speaking, and using the 4 C's too? I know that's something that a lot of people talk about with 21st century learners, the communication, the collaboration, the creativity, and the critical thinking. What other way can students develop those skills, but also develop the student voice piece, Charles? You can't develop that with foreign language in terms of expressing the student voice or the music or the science, but you get all that and the student voice piece with media. So I think it's so essential that educators are super aware of the benefits and how it's, again, not just entertainment, but also educational.
Well, Clement, I think I want to close this out with something that you said earlier, because I don't believe it just relates to media, as you pointed out, but to education as a whole, that we need to make sure that our students are transforming from consumers to creators. Our students cannot just sit in the classroom and consume information, consume knowledge, just as they shouldn't sit online and just consume information and whatever happens to be streaming across their TikTok or whatever it may be. But how can they be creators, right? How can they take that information and create knowledge? How can they create information for their peers? And so thank you for that. How can we move students from consumers to creators? Clement, I want to say thank you so much for being on the show, for all the amazing work that you're doing, and really giving, opening a door to what I believe is going to be the future of just how we operate as a whole. So I want to say thank you, thank you, thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. I think remote learning and what we've seen during the pandemic has really shown us that there are some alternative, innovative educational ways to really help students. And I'm happy to be a part of that and happy to connect with educators and administrators.
If you haven't heard about Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast. Don't believe me? Here's 5 reasons why. First, it's free. Second, there's creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. 3, Anchor will distribute your podcast for you, so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and so many more. 4, you can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. And 5, it's everything you need to make a podcast, all in one place. Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. I want to thank you for listening to the Counter Narrative Podcast. If you like what you are hearing, please be sure to like and subscribe. The show can be found on Anchor, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, and several of your other favorite platforms. This podcast is also featured on schoolrubric.com, where you can find educational articles, videos, and interviews with educators from around the globe. Be sure to connect with the host and other listeners by following the show on Twitter at the CN Podcast and joining the show's Facebook group. Take care.